we'll update you on the reported shooting this morning in San Diego.
We'll also discuss the governor's new budget that can make or break higher education.
And later, we've avoided the snow here in Louisiana, but the East Coast saw a lot of it this weekend.
All this and more, Newsbeat starts right now.
Welcome to Newsbeat. I'm Mitch Rabley alongside Madeline Adams. We'll get right into the news tonight with today's top story out of San Diego.
A report of an active shooter at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego, California was released this morning. This report turned out to be a false alarm. Investigators did not find any substantial evidence to one witness's report of hearing gunshots in the basement of Building 26. Authorities still searched the building, but there were no reports of injuries or evidence that a gun had been fired. A spokesperson for the hospital said that they are not terribly concerned at the moment, but will still remain cautious throughout the day. The hospital also declined to say who made the original accusations.
All throughout the past week, reports of looming budget cuts have lingered over the LSU campus. Earlier, I sat down with Jay Darden, the governor's chief budget officer, to talk about how the cuts will affect life here on campus. We're having a little technical difficulty with that. The legislative leadership is expected to have committee chairs and start evaluating the governor's budget plan by next week.
Democratic presidential candidates gathered at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, Monday night to discuss the issues ahead of the Iowa caucus, the first contest of the 2016 election season. The questions were picked by voters themselves, and CNN's Kim Hutcherson shows us how each candidate fared.
At CNN's Democratic Town Hall in Des Moines, voters took center stage, presenting their questions to the candidate seeking the Democratic presidential nomination. Hillary Clinton, who has a 6-point lead in Iowa, according to the latest poll, faced voters last. She took a philosophical approach, responding to attacks leveled against her.
Look, I've been around a long time. People have thrown all kinds of things at me. I just keep going forward. They fall by the wayside. They come up with these outlandish things. They make these charges. I just keep going forward because there's nothing to it. They throw all this stuff at me, and I'm still standing.
Clinton also reminded voters she's been working on health care for a very long time.
When I worked on health care back in 93 and 94, and I don't know if you were born then, I can't quite tell, but if you'd been around and had been able to pay attention, I was trying to get us to universal health care coverage, working with my husband.
And she talked up her government experience and foreign policy credentials. Martin O'Malley was sandwiched in between Clinton and Sanders. He had a message for his supporters.
Hold strong at your caucus because America is looking for a new leader. America is scanning the horizon. We cannot be this fed up with our gridlocked, dysfunctional national politics and think that a resort to old ideologies or old names is going to move us forward.
Bernie Sanders kicked off the debate and took many questions about his health care plans and viability as a candidate.
The ideas that I am talking about are not radical ideas. We may raise taxes, but we are also going to eliminate private health insurance premiums for individuals and for business.
On February 1st, Iowa caucus goers will choose a candidate that best represents their interests. I'm Kim Hutcherson reporting.
And new polls show Hillary Clinton leading over her fellow Democratic presidential candidates. Clinton is polling at 52%, with Bernie Sanders at 38% and Martin O'Malley trailing with only 2% support. On the Republican side, Donald Trump continues his commanding lead with 41%. His closest competitor, Ted Cruz, at 19%.
And earlier in the broadcast, I mentioned how the threat of budget cuts are once again looming over the LSU campus. I sat down with officials from the administration of Governor John Bel Edwards to talk about how that's going to affect things here at LSU.
We don't fix the structural budget deficit, we can't fix any of our other problems.
Just 2 weeks into his term as governor, the administration of John Bel Edwards is facing a much more daunting financial situation than they originally thought.
Because of the severity of the problem, I think those cuts are going to be a little bit deeper than we had hoped they would be, particularly in the short term in the current fiscal year, since we only have 3 months.
Facing an $800 million deficit that must be addressed in the next 3 months, the Edwards administration has proposed a plan that would combine cuts and raising taxes. Commissioner of Administration Jay Darden says these measures are necessary.
This is not Chicken Little, and this is not a problem we'll easily get over and it'll all work out. This is very serious, and the bills are coming due, the money has run out, and we've got to take some drastic steps to raise revenue and to make cuts to get through this fiscal year.
In a letter to higher education leaders across the state, Darden warned of the possible severity if the legislature does not pass the Edwards plan. Colleges across the state would need to cut $131 million, $63 million of which would come from right here on the LSU campus.
I can tell you it's going to be lots, hundreds of, perhaps thousands of layoffs in higher education. It's going to be massive reductions in our medical services. Students will not have the classes that they need to graduate on time.
Governor Edwards will call a special session of the legislature for February 14th, sending newly elected legislators his budget proposal as a Valentine. With a Democrat in the mansion and the GOP controlling the legislature, some experts expect a showdown. But Darden is optimistic that the Edwards plan will pass.
If we're able to raise revenue, then we're not going to have to impose that degree of cuts on higher education or anybody else. There are going to be some reductions in statutory dedications, but that $131 million request of higher ed was if the funds are not raised as the governor's proposed, and we face a worst case scenario. So we're hoping we won't be in that situation. We just wanted people to prepare in case we get there.
Legislative leadership is expected to name committee chairs and start evaluating Governor Edwards' budget plan next week. Coming up after the break, we'll show you the new way people are helping the residents of Flint, Michigan through their water crisis.
We'll also update you on how the East Coast made it through a snowy weekend. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Lawyers representing residents of Flint, Michigan in a lawsuit over toxic water have subpoenaed Michigan Governor Rick Snyder. They want emails, text messages, or other documents sent or received by Snyder or his staff relating to the Flint water crisis over the last 2 years. The governor's representatives declined to comment on the subpoena. Meanwhile, Michigan's top prosecutor is warning parents in Flint to keep their children away from the water, even telling them to avoid bathing in it. Michigan Attorney General Bill Schuette announced today that he is appointing former prosecutor and retired FBI investigator to lead an independent investigation into what happened with the water in Flint.
People who want to help Flint residents cope with the water crisis are flocking to GoFundMe. Donors have already given nearly $200,000. The money will go toward things like purchasing bottles of water, water filters, and even bags of fresh fruit and vegetables. One account is even raising money to offset the costs incurred by the Virginia Tech researchers who first tested the water and found unsafe levels of lead. In response to the outpouring of support, GoFundMe itself is making its own contribution. The campaign that raises the most money will get an extra $10,000.
After this weekend's blizzard blanketed the East Coast, cities are still struggling with what to do with all the snow. At least 34 deaths have been blamed on the weather, many people from trying to dig themselves out. CNN's Mary Maloney has the details.
Millions are digging, bulldozing, and plowing the snow away. The deadly winter storm caused crashes and roof collapses. New York is bouncing back quickly.
Things are not entirely normal today, but a lot of the city is operating well.
But it's a different story in Washington, where the mayor warns the district will be dealing with snow all week.
While we have made some progress, there is still a lot more to do.
D.C. schools remain closed and federal buildings are shut down. The House of Representatives canceled votes for the whole week. Meanwhile, air travelers are feeling the pain as airports slowly return to life. 12,000 flights have been canceled, including about 1,800 on Monday.
I had 8 cancellations, but they've been rolling all the cancellations over. So I'm thrilled to be getting out on time, headed back to New Orleans.
I'm Mary Maloney reporting.
While the worst of the storms is most likely over, many buildings are still blanketed with snow. Take a look at this. This is the White House as of this morning. Lawns still covered in snow. Federal offices and buildings across Washington are closed today after 22 inches of snowfall. Do you feel like you have more Facebook friends than you can keep track of? I know all 343 of mine. But coming up after the break, we'll tell you about a new study and what it can tell you about your Facebook friends. Very much for joining us. That's all the time we have for you today. You can follow us on Twitter at LSU Tiger TV and at TigerTV.tv. For Madeline Adams, I'm Mitch Rabelais. Thank you and good night.